it's summertime. Not because of your background, Denny.
Oh, that looks beautiful.
Because that's virtual, and that's 365 days a year.
Yes, it is.
Where is that?
That's in Martinique.
Oh,
Beautiful.
So I can tell it's summer. You know how I can tell?
why?
Because of the lack of attendance.
Yes.
Oh.
That's how I tell. People want to be out in the sun, wanted to be out in the nice weather. I can't blame them.
Yeah.
But that being said, let us learn together from the Parsha of the week that we can have the sun not only shine on the outside, but shine on the inside, because that's even more important. Because after all, when the sun shines on the outside, it's only for certain hours of the day, and it's not always shining. So, but we should always be shining. How are we going to get to a state that we are always shining? Well, that's Mashiach. That's what Mashiach is, a time that it will be shining in our lives. Right. So what does that mean exactly? We just gave a course on this, and many of you part of that. What does that mean? What is that when you say the word Mashiach? What do those words mean to you? Anybody?
Well, it's coming to the end of this age. It's coming to the end of cruelty. It's coming to the end of hardship, evil, anti-Semitism. And we will have someone who will be in charge and in control of all of those things.
Very good. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else want to argue with Denny on that? not for the sake of an argument, but for the sake of Talmudic discussion. Is that what it is ultimately? No more famine, no more war, no more jealousy,
no more envy.
No more envy. So that's true. All of that is true, as the Rambam writes, Maimonides writes, as the Talmud and the sages teach us, absolutely. But is that what it is ultimately? So let us delve into this week's Parsha, which is a very, very special Parsha, because it is the only place in all of Torah where we have a direct reference, even though it isn't clear with the actual words, but the implication of the reference is very direct to Mashiach. We do have in the book of Dvorim and Deuteronomy a reference to Mashiach, but that's not about the person Mashiach, but it speaks there about the ingathering of the Jewish people. And we have other hints to Mashiach, but in this week's Parsha, in the non-Jewish prophet Bilam, we have a very clear understanding. Let us go to... Okay. I'll share the screen here. All right. Redefining Moshiach. Are you waiting for the right Messiah? Okay, that's not a trick question. Not a trick question. Okay. So what are we indeed really waiting for? Let us look at text number 1 from this week's Parsha. I see it, but not now, says Bilam, when he is wanting to curse the Jewish people. But of course, God doesn't allow him to curse the Jewish people. He only allows him to bless. So now he is seeing what the future has in hold for the Jewish people. So I see it, but not now. I behold it, but not soon. A star has gone forth from Jacob, and a staff will arise from Israel that will crush the princes of Moab and will uproot the sons of Shais. Continues the prophecy. Edom shall be possessed, and Seir shall become the possessions of his enemies, and Israel shall triumph. A ruler shall come out of Jacob and destroy the remnant of the city. So this is Bilam's prophecy. What is he exactly referring to? What does he mean precisely? So he learns that this is speaking about King Mashiach and the various duties that Mashiach has. And it is all based on a connection to King David. Let us see what the Rambam, how Maimonides understands his teachings. Text number 2. Can everybody see the print? Yeah? Clear?
Yes.
Okay. It is even written in the Torah portion of Bilam, who prophesies about 2 Mashiachs. The first Mashiach was David, who saved Israel from her adversaries. The final Mashiach will be from his sons and will deliver Israel, meaning the Jewish people, from the hands of the descendants of Esau. There it says, I see it, but not now. This refers to David. I behold it, but not soon. Right? This is quoting from this week's Torah portion of Bilam. This is King Mashiach. A star has gone forth from Jacob. This is David. And a staff will arise from Israel. This is King Mashiach. That will crush the princes Moab. This is David. And so it says, and he smote Moab and measured them with a rope and uproot all of the sons of Shais. This is King Mashiach, of whom it says, and his dominion shall be from sea to sea. And finally, an Edom shall be possessed. This is David, as it says, and Edom shall become slaves of David, and Seir shall become possessions of his enemies. This is King Mashiach, as it says, and the Savior shall come upon Mount Zion to judge the Mount of Esau. Okay, so we have here, according to the Rambam, this prophecy refers to both King David and to Mashiach in alternating fashion. One part of the verse, King David. The second part of the verse, Mashiach, meaning they're intertwined. What's the significance of this? Why is the Rambam mentioning King David when he's discussing the laws of Mashiach? Now, it's true the Mashiach comes from the house of David. That's his lineage. But why is that so important that we have to intertwine the entire understanding of the prophecy of Bilam with the two of them, and that he brings it down and it's all of its details? Why is that important? The truth is, this is the way the Rambam understands. This is the way the Rambam understands this teachings. However, other commentaries understand, because remember, it's only implied understanding. It isn't openly revealed saying Mashiach. It's a hint to Mashiach, right? So other commentaries, the Medrash, they say that it's actually referring to Mashiach, but not King David. The house of Esau, and the battle between Esau, which is Edom. Edom is Rome, which is the final exile. So it's not in reference of King David, but it's in reference in the final exile that Mashiach will have to deal with, which happens to be the final exile we're in. Rashi, in this week's Torah portion, he makes the reference, not half and half, part of the verse King David and part of the verse Mashiach, but the first part is all about King David, and only the last verse is about Mashiach. Now, that being said, everybody agrees that it's speaking about the times of Mashiach. Because Bilam himself says, I'm going to tell you what's going to be Achris Hayamim, in the end of days, in the times of Mashiach. The question is, what part is about Mashiach? What part is, well, whether King David, whether it's about the final time of exile of Edom, which is Esav, and the battle between Mashiach and Esav, or is it which verses are about King David and which verses are about Mashiach? So there is a little, shall we say, play. But one thing is definite. It is speaking about Mashiach. Nobody argues about that point. Okay? But our reference point here is from the Rambam. The Rambam, who is the final opinion when it comes to halachic matters about Mashiach, because he is the only one who clearly elucidates, gives us a very crystal clear understanding about the laws of Mashiach. Other commentators are just giving on, well, like Rashi on the verse in the Torah portion, the Medrash teaching also based on the verses in the Torah, but the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, where we're learning from, is a halachic reference that is giving us what it means by according to Jewish law. Okay, so Rashi can look at it from a different perspective, from the simple meaning. The Medrash will look at it according to the homiletic meaning. Rambam will look at it from a halachic perspective, and that's why you can have a distinction between them, and all of them are correct. Why? Because it's God's divine wisdom. So God's divine wisdom can be understood on many dimensions, and they're not a contradiction one to the other. But we are going to focus in on, again, the Rambam. So what we need to understand, the juxtaposition of King David with Mashiach. So the first level in understanding will be as follows. How many years have the Jews been waiting for Mashiach? Many. At least since the destruction of the Second Holy Temple, if not even before that. At least then, right? Destruction of the Holy Temple, no longer the presence of God, the Shekhinah in the Holy of Holies. So it's been a long time, to put it mildly. How do you stay strong with faith? It's challenging. It's a very great challenge. Back in the day, with terrible pogroms, so, you cry out to Hashem, bring us Mashiach. We need salvation because we don't want the famine. We don't want the war anymore. We don't want all the problems. So there are times that people, that's what they cried out for. Other times, on the contrary, someone just bought a new home and he's got now a whole farm full of cattle and chicken, and he just met the new neighbors, and everybody is so living a good life. And the husband comes back to his wife and says, I just came from synagogue and the rabbi said Mashiach is coming anytime now. So I says, what do you mean? We just bought a new home. This is our dream home. What do you mean Mashiach is coming now? It's going to be with our new home. And we've got all this cattle and the sheep and the chicken and everything that we've just, we're going to make a real good living now. And now Mashiach is coming and he's going to take us to Israel. Oh, well, we can't deal with that. So husband thinks for a moment. God saved us from Pharaoh. He saves us from Haman and from other crusaders and other pogroms. No, God will save us from Mashiach too. So many people, the lack of faith is understandable after so much time. How do we strengthen that faith? So here the Torah is coming to give us the strength in that faith. How? By making Mashiach akin to the kingdom of David. In other words, by understanding that there's a connection between King David and Mashiach, it'll make it easier for us to know that Mashiach is coming. To know that Mashiach is coming. In other words, if the concept of Mashiach already happened, it already occurred. King David, right? It already happened. That he was the Redeemer. He's the one who fought off all the enemies. He's the one who conquered the rest of Israel, including Jerusalem, that gave us the opportunity to have finally the Holy Temple on Temple Mount. In the end, it was through his son, King Solomon, but he readied everything for us, right? So since there was already this time once before, it's not such a leap of faith that we are going to be able to have it come again. Let's
Rabbi Fine,
yes.
just to clear something in my mind, are you saying that the Torah does in fact make a reference to Moshiach? Is that what you are saying?
Well, no, we just made a reference to Mashiach, right?
To the coming of Mashiach twice, David,
right?
and the Mashiach at the end of the days.
Yes.
So okay, I just wanted to clarify that in my mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here, let me just put it on the screen over here. Here. So Rabbi Moshe of Tirani writes, even Bilam prophesies of two Mashiachs, about the first Mashiach who was David, and about the last Mashiach who will emerge from his progeny. Just as his prophecy was fulfilled with the first Mashiach, so it will be fulfilled with the last. In other words, what did Bilam have a prophecy of? Two Mashiachs, King David and the final Mashiach. So if the first one came true, then we know the second one will be also come true. Remember, when did Bilam prophesy this? In the year 3334, right? When did King David live? 1,000 years later. So this was a complete prophecy about King David. And at the same time, if that came true, that gives us the encouragement, gives us the strength of faith that the second one will also come true. That's the first point, okay? That's why they're intertwined, the two of them, to strengthen our faith. And the truth is, this idea, we also have famous story of Rabbi Akiva, who lived about 50 years after the destruction of the Second Holy Temple. And there were still ruins because the Romans still ruled over Israel at the time. And he was there with some of his colleagues coming to Temple Mount, and they saw a fox come out of the Holy of Holies. Famous story, I'm sure you've heard it before. And his colleagues started to cry. And he started to laugh. So they asked him, why are you laughing? So he asked them, as a good Jew, why are you crying? Why are you weeping? What are you weeping about? So they responded, what do you mean what are we weeping about? A place in which what is said that a common man that draws near will be put to death, and now there's foxes coming out of there, right? The Holy of Holies is such a place that a commoner can't go there, only the high priest on Yom Kippur, and a fox is coming, shouldn't we weep? And so he replies, what does he reply? Well, that's exactly why I'm laughing. Because we have a prophecy that's exactly what's going to happen from Zechariah says that will happen. Sorry, that Uriah says that will happen. And then Zechariah says it is after that the destruction and that a fox will come out of the Holy of Holies, that'll be ruined. that now there will be the final redemption. So he says, well, if the first one came true, then that is an indication to me, it came to fruition, that now is time for the second one to come true, the Mashiach is coming. So therefore I am happy because I see that this is only a sign that Mashiach's coming. So this is the point over here. The Rambam is telling us that the intertwining of this week's Torah portion of Bilam and his prophecy between King David and Mashiach is to strengthen our faith that if Bilam saw 1,000 years henceforward, that he will come and he will bring a salvation to the Jewish people, so will then come the second Mashiach, bring that salvation. So we've resolved why they're, connected, these prophecies, right? You understand that from a historical perspective. But then the question would be, isn't there someone who would be more fitting that this should be connected to? If we're talking about redemption, King David was the king of all of Israel. His father-in-law Shaul was only, but he was the true anointed king, the one who prepared, the holy temple that would be built, that brought complete sovereignty over the land, absolutely. But there's someone who's a real redeemer, and that was Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to compare Mashiach to Moshe Rabbeinu? And so says the Medrash, as a matter of fact. What does the Medrash tell us? Oops. Okay. Rabbi Barachia said in the name Rabbi Yitzchak, the last Redeemer will be just as the first. Just as it says of the first Redeemer, so Moshe took his wife and his sons, mounted them upon a donkey, so too will be the last Redeemer, as it says, humble and riding a donkey. Just as the first Redeemer brought down the manna, as it says, behold, I am going to rain down for you bread from heaven, so too will the last Redeemer will bring down manna, as it says, may there be an abundance of grain in the land. And just as the first Redeemer brought up the well, so too the last Redeemer will bring up the water, as it says, and the spring will issue from the house of God and will water of the valley of Shittim. So what do we have over here? The Medrash is making a very clear connection between the first Redeemer, Moshe Rabbeinu, and the final Redeemer. Now, it's true that David saved the Jewish people from their enemies, but he didn't redeem them from an exile. Moshe is the classic example of what it means, a messenger of God, that he saved the Jewish people from exile. Took us out of Egypt. Well, that's what Mashiach is going to do. He's also going to take us out of our exile, the final Edomite exile, the one of Edom, of Rome. So it would seem that if there's to be a connection between two people, it would be between Moshe Rabbeinu and Mashiach, and not King David. And finally, we need to understand that the Mishnah Torah is a book of halacha, of Jewish law. It's not meant to be an inspiring teaching, but to be very practical and very concise in the teachings of halacha. So why is there a whole section there about King David and all the details there about King David in the first place? To inspire us in faith? Well, why all the details? Secondly, wouldn't the connection be more appropriate with Moshe Rabbeinu, that he first redeemed us? If we saw that we were once redeemed, we will be redeemed again. So this is what we need to deal with. Any questions before we move forward? The issues are clear? All right. So the key to understand the connection between King David and the laws of Mashiach are found in the Rambam himself. Let us see what the Rambam has to say. So this is from chapter 11, law number 3 in the Rambam. Do not presume that the Messianic king must work miracles and wonders, bring about new phenomena in the world, resurrect the dead, or perform other similar deeds. This is definitely not true. Proof can be brought from the fact that Rabbi Akiva, one of the greater sages of the Mishnah, was one of the supporters of King Bar Koziba, and would describe him as a Messianic king. He and all the sages of his generation considered him to be the Messianic king until he was killed because of sins. Once he was killed, they realized that he was not the Mashiach. The sages did not ask him for signs or wonders. The main thrust of the matter is, in other words, the main thrust of Mashiach is, this Torah, its statutes and its laws are everlasting. We may not add to them or detract from them. So what is this point over here? It's as follows. It's very easy when we think about Mashiach to get lost in the wonderment of Mashiach. No more famine, no more wars, no more jealousy, and all of these things. The truth is, that's not the essence of Mashiach. And even though, truth be said, that is not going to be even a miracle in the times of Mashiach. But all of that is a sidebar. That's not the main point. What is the main point? What is the main point about Mashiach? Mashiach is a person who is to accomplish, as the Rambam writes, in the following halacha. We just did halacha 3. Now we continue with halacha 4 in the Rambam. If a king will arise from the house of David who diligently contemplates the Torah and observes its mitzvahs as prescribed in the written law and in the oral law as David his ancestor did, and he will compel all of Israel, meaning the Jewish people, to walk in the way of Torah, and who will rectify the breaches of its observances, and will fight the wars of God, we may, with assurance, consider him to be Mashiach. Consider, not definite yet. If he succeeds in the above, builds the temple, the third holy temple, in its place, and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is definitely the Mashiach. He will then improve the entire world, motivating all nations to serve God together, as the verse states. I will transform the peoples to a purer language, that they all will call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. So the halachic definition of Mashiach is a person that restores the Davidic dynasty to its prior state, thereby bringing about what we call Shleimus HaTorah, the mitzvah, which means the perfected state of Torah and mitzvahs. Meaning that someone whose life is devoted to Torah observance will be ultimately able to facilitate it in its complete way. And that's why Mashiach needs to rebuild the temple and gather the Jews into the exile, from the exile, and to bring about world peace and a number of other wonders that will happen. Why? Because those things are only incidental. Because the primary function is, as the Rebbe describes, this is not merely an account of the things that Mashiach will do and what will happen in this time. Rather, it is a law, meaning the definition of Mashiach is that he will renew the Davidic dynasty, restoring it to its initial sovereignty, not that he will make something new, which in practical terms is actualized through building the temple and gathering the dispersed of Israel. And with this, the purpose and the reason for the coming of Mashiach is achieved. What is that? Then in his days, the observance of all the statutes will return to the previous state. He will offer sacrifices, observe the sabbatical and the Jubilee years according to all their particulars, as described by the Torah, which is connected with the gathering of the dispersed of Israel once all of Israel is dwelling in the land. So let's understand over here what's going on. The Rebbe is just explaining in the Rambam that what the Rambam is coming is not for the incidentals, for the sidebar, for no more famine, no more war, no more jealousy, no more contentious ways between peoples, because that is all by the by. That is only in order that we should be able to serve God through Torah and mitzvahs in its fullest manner. So if you have famine, it's difficult. If you have war, therefore we may be subjugated to other nations and we don't have our own destiny in our hands. And likewise, if there's jealousy and so on, then what will happen? That will be difficult for us then to be focused in what ultimately we're here to focus in on is our connection to God through Torah and mitzvahs. And this is the purpose of Mashiach. In other words, the image we have of a world of peace is only a means to an end, not as an end in itself. Because think about it for a moment, folks. What's the value of peace? As an end in itself? Is there? It means we're not at each other's throats. But it can't be an end in itself. It's only a means. What's the value of that there will be an abundance of materiality? It's only a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. Because you have abundance, then what? What does that do? Oh, now I can enjoy life. So a lot of people are miserable with abundance. So, that's not a proof that you're going to enjoy life. But then, so those things are only a means to an end. But serving God is an end in itself. What we're doing right now in study of, Torah studies, Parsha, it's not a means to an end. It's not that through this something will, yes, there will be also a something that will come through this. We'll be smarter, we'll be wiser, we'll be kinder afterwards. But in this, what we're engaged right now is an end in itself, in that we are serving God right now. When you pray, you're serving God. When you give in tzedakah, you're serving God as an end in itself. So the ultimate is the perfection in that divine service. That is the ultimate purpose. All of the other things are only there to allow that we should be able to have the perfect world so we can have a perfect connection. That's the point. It's like you work hard so you can go on vacation. Okay, and now what? But I'm on vacation. Okay, and what do you have from that? I'm enjoying life. Oh, okay. So from a Jewish perspective, enjoying life means about a connection to God, which then allow us to truly connect to each other properly and to the fullest manner, will allow us to connect to ourselves in the ultimate way. And that is the purpose of what Mashiach is coming for. So let's see how the Rebbe explains this further. Maimonides' words are, it is even written in the Torah portion of Bilam, who prophesies about both Mashiachs. The first Mashiach was David, who saved Israel from her adversaries. The final Mashiach will be from his sons, who will deliver Israel in the end of days. From here we know that the consequence of Mashiach and the point of Mashiach is to renew the Davidic dynasty and to restore it to its initial sovereignty. In this sense, he is the final Mashiach vis-a-vis the first Mashiach, who was David. As the Rambam writes in that passage from Bilam, it is said that all the details that pertain to the first Mashiach, who was David, will also pertain to the final Mashiach, King Mashiach. From his initial appearance and the assumption of sovereignty until he ultimately swept through the corners of Moab, which is paralleled by Mashiach, and break down all of the sons of Shais. Likewise, Edom will be demolished. This refers to David. And Seir will be destroyed. This refers to the Messianic king. So the Torah is making a juxtaposition between two kings, David and King Mashiach. Not only, the first point we made was to reinforce our faith, right, in prophecy. That just as Bilam's first prophecy took place, that there was a King David, so there will also be King Mashiach. But there's something much more critical over here in the juxtaposition. We're getting the very definition of what Mashiach is. By analyzing what King David was all about and what he achieved, we can now know what Mashiach is all about and what he needs to achieve. So if we compare Mashiach to King David, but not to Moshe as a result. How so? What did Moshe do? He took us out of a bad place. But he did not bring us into a good space called Israel. He didn't do that. Last week's Parsha, right? It was taken away from him. Another story of its own, but he didn't do that. In other words, he didn't provide the necessary conditions that would be ideal for our fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs in their complete state. He didn't do that, right? Just going into the land, how many mitzvahs are mitzvahs to do that we fulfill in the land? And having the majority of people who have to live in the land and the holy temple in the land. The first person to do that, to lay the groundwork that we can have the complete observance of Torah and mitzvahs, is none other than King David. He banished the enemies of Israel from the land. He granted the land of Israel to the Jewish people full, complete sovereignty. We had the beginning of the building of the Holy Temple in the eternal city of Jerusalem. That would be, he prepared it all, the plans and the materials and everything. It was only his son that would ultimately build it. And all of that is in order that we could fulfill Torah and mitzvahs in its fullest manner. Torah, Shleimus HaTorah, the completion of the Torah and the fulfillment of its mitzvahs. So therefore, we understand now the juxtaposition between the two. Not only is that, as we mentioned before, that we can have greater faith in the prophecy that it will come to fruition because we see the first prophecy did, right? But we learn everything about Mashiach, right, from King David. And therefore, the juxtaposition is necessary for us to understand and appreciate everything about him. The Rebbe says, Mashiach will bring about the complete fulfillment of the Torah by being liberated from the domination of foreign power, or from domination by foreign powers. On the contrary, the Mashiach will reign over them. He will be able to properly occupy ourselves with Torah and mitzvahs and be free to be involved in Torah and wisdom without any pressures or disturbances, as the Rambam writes at length elsewhere. In exile, we're unable to perform the mitzvahs in its completion. Our relationship with God is sorely lacking today. This is what the defining role of Mashiach is that he will bring this to us speedily. in our day. And this is what the Rambam writes. In the future, Mashiach, the Messianic king will arise and renew the Davidic dynasty, restoring it to its initial sovereignty. He will build the temple and gather the dispersed of Israel. Then in his days, the observance of all the statutes will return to their previous state. We will offer sacrifices and observe the sabbatical and jubilee years according to their particulars as described by the Torah. Anyone who does not believe in him or does not await his coming denies not only the statements of the other prophets, but those of Torah and of Moshe, our teacher. So by making this comparison between Mashiach and King David, we're establishing the definition of Mashiach, and therefore that's why the Rambam felt it was necessary, all of the details to put there in halacha, in Jewish law, because this is telling us what we need to believe in, what we need to await for in his coming. And with this, we can understand why he also puts these laws, the laws of Mashiach, right, at the end of his Yad HaChazaka of the Mishnah Torah. You know, you might think that some of these laws, since it's, you know, we're going to have the temple back, so maybe it should be, these laws should be put in the laws of the temple that the Rambam writes about, or maybe the agricultural laws that we will have to observe when Mashiach comes. But by placing it at the end of his compendium, of his book of Jewish law, that is Jewish law in every area of Jewish observance and Jewish life, but putting it in the culmination is telling us that this is the whole point of Mashiach, is to bring the culmination of all the laws that I have written previously, to bring it to its fulfillment, to its fruition, to its shleimus HaTorah, its completeness in the observance of Torah and mitzvah, because this is what Mashiach is all about. Any questions? Hey, Tim, welcome. No, it's all clear. Wow.
I will have to still learn on all of this.
Sorry?
I will just have to think and meditate on all of this. It's
a lot.
It is. It is.
It is, absolutely. Anybody? Margot, Rena, Heather, Sarah, Christo, Celia, Alice, anybody, any thoughts over here?
I have a thought, not a question, but a thought.
Go ahead.
I just feel sorry for Moses because he did so much but he didn't get there and he didn't get to achieve like David did. And it just, my heart just feels bad.
You remind me of my wife. You know, at the end of Deuteronomy, when he passes away, like every year, it's like, you know, the truth is, it's very sad. It's sad.
It is. And,
right.
I mean, because the people put him through so much, and he said, "Who am I to lead?" And he did it anyway. He just
right.
And just because he threw the rock, threw at the rock, I mean, I just felt bad for him. That's all. Just saying.
I get you. I get you loud and clear. And by the way, you know, if anybody has an eternal quality to him, is Moshe Rabbeinu. He is more oft quoted, learned, right, from the Torah than any other person. And by the way, one of the reasons why he did not go into the land is very simple, because if he would have, that would have been Mashiach, the final redemption. Because everything about Moshe Rabbeinu is eternal. He gave us an eternal Torah. He gave us an eternity of the Jewish people. Everything about him is eternal. So for him to go into the land would be, in a sense, bringing the eternity of those times then. And therefore, that was not the time
was.
You had to wait for a Rena and a Heather and a Denny and a Tim and a Margot and a Sarah and here's still Celia, Alice, and myself and the rest of us, that we should be here, that we should be a part of bringing the final redemption. So, in the end, he is the first Redeemer, and from him comes the last Redeemer. He's not, he's not the first, we call him the first Redeemer, the first Mashiach, because again, what is Mashiach? The person who's bringing the completion of Torah and mitzvahs, right? So King David was the first one to start that process. He's the first Redeemer. Mashiach has both qualities. So therefore, he's really compared to Moshe Rabbeinu and to King David. But in the and we see the Medrash did compare the two, right? So there is comparison because they're both Redeemers. But Moshe Rabbeinu was only a Redeemer. He wasn't the anointed one. Anointed one meaning to bring completion. Again, taking out of a bad place is one thing, but to bring into a good space, to a holy space, that's another thing. So, think Moshe Rabbeinu out of a bad place. King David didn't take us out of a bad place. We were in Israel already. He brought us into a better space. Mashiach has both qualities. So therefore, there's a comparison to two. But the ultimate is not out of a bad place, but is into a good space, a holy space. So that's ultimately what Mashiach is doing. So Mashiach has both qualities as a redeemer, because he's going to redeem us from this exile, a bad place called exile. But to ultimately bring us into a good space, which means the completion of Torah mitzvahs in such a manner that we are not subjugated, because we're not subjugated by the nations of the world, so we don't have to worry about anti-Semitism, right? And therefore you could walk as a Jew on the street. You could do your mitzvahs in the street as a Jew, right? Have to worry about all of these things. None of that. And then we can have a complete connection to God in the observance of all of the mitzvahs that we can't fulfill now because we don't have the Holy Temple and we don't have the majority of Jews living in the land of Israel, which are necessary in order that we can have all of Torah mitzvahs, 613 commandments, to be applicable. So, so again, it's important to overemphasize this point because it's counterintuitive. We think of Mashiach and a utopian state of being, and it's true, it's a utopian state of being, but that's not the purpose. Utopian state of being, no more wars, right? And that there's abundance is only a means. It's only a means. It's ultimately, but think about it. Think about your life and, what's the most important thing you have? Aside, is relationships. So whether it's family relationships, community relationships, fellow Jews, and whatever it is, relationships, and the ultimate relationship with God. So when we understand that, that all of the rest is only the context for it, and that will allow us and give us a much more understanding of what Mashiach is coming to fulfill, why we're waiting for him, what is it that we're waiting of him that will be ultimately fulfilled, is that we can have that clear connection. Now, this is all what we spoke about is according to Rambam and Halacha, right? What we've spoken about in other occasions is also what Hasidus explains about how the what we learn in Tanya, what we learn in Hasidus, right, about the presence of God and the realness of God that we have from Tanya, that we have it in our mind's eye, then it'll be then in our physical eye that we will experience the presence of God, the Shekhinah in our lives that will be experienced. So that is the inner dimension, a deeper understanding of Mashiach. What we did today is study it from halachic perspective. What is the difference between the two? Halacha is about the do's and the don'ts. So we need to know the do's and the don'ts of Mashiach. What does he do? What does he not do? Oh, well, he doesn't do miracles, right? By the way, he can do miracles, but he's not, we don't know him to be Mashiach because of any miracles. We know him to be Mashiach because he fulfills what the Rambam says, that he compels the Jewish people to fulfill Torah mitzvahs, the nations of the world. He fights the battles of God, and he builds the holy temple and brings the ingathering of the Jewish people. So those are the halachic qualifications that are necessary for Mashiach to come, or the coming of Mashiach, and that's what we're waiting for. But that's from a halachic point of view. Halachic is the do's and the don'ts. Hasidus explains us the soul of Mashiach. The soul of Mashiach is a teacher who is going to inspire our soul and give us the capacity to see, to experience the presence of God in our lives. But that's not a halachic ruling. That's the internal understanding of, of what the do's and the don'ts ultimately will bring us to. So, of course, why won't there be famine, and there won't be wars and jealousy? So the Rambam, we learned this last week in our weekly class. If you recall, the Rambam writes, because there will be abundance of a materiality. But that's good, that there shouldn't be famine, maybe war, because there'll be abundance. Everybody will have a wealth. But then we said further, the Rambam says, and that we will have delicacies like dust of the earth. What does it mean? Will be delicacies like dust of the earth. And as delicacies, it means literally good food, right? Whatever you consider good food, it'll be like dust of the earth. It means it'll be so common, just like dust of the earth. The Rebbe takes it a step further. It doesn't, not only will it be so common like dust of the earth, but it will be so, our attitude towards it will be like dust of the earth. Why would that be? That if you have, the experience that we see today is that when people have materiality, the challenge of today is that they're not looking for spirituality, they're looking for more materiality. As the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, if you have 100, you want 200. If you have 200, you want 400, and so on. So why would it be that there's going to be this change? That all of a sudden, the more materiality you will have, the more you're going to see it as dust of the earth. Why? So
people be connected with God, with the Shem.
Well, that's the answer is that even in the halachic ruling, we could see a space, a point of where the Pnimius Torah, the inward dimension of the Torah, is kind of hidden in that thought, right? That there will be dust, that delicacy will be dust of the earth, is because God's presence will be so real, right? That the presence of God in Torah and mitzvahs that we fulfill, and in our daily routine of God's presence, that materiality as an end in itself will not be our engagement, will not be what we're interested in. We'll be interested in something much more profound and much more divine, the awareness of God. And that's what the Rambam writes. that we will be involved in the awareness of God. Why will we be involved in the awareness of God? Is because the awareness of God will be much more real to us. We can have the awareness of God today, and we're, 10 people here today involved in that. Then it'll be all of humanity will be involved in that, because it'll be very clear and apparent the presence of God in the teachings and in our lives. So then, of course, materiality will be dust of the earth, will only be as a means to an end, and will not be as an end in itself. So we see that kind of hinted in the Rambam's teachings, what Hasidus explains. Is that clear? All right, any questions?
I guess otherwise, the people that Bnei Yisrael would have seen it in the desert if they had it really up, if everything was revealed in such a godly way, I mean,
You're talking about the 40 years in the desert.
what's that?
I'm not clear. You mean the 40 years
Well,
in
they
the
had
desert?
manna, and they had the clouds, and they had all the things that could be material. They had their clothes.
So we learned about that in the Mashiach course. What was the answer to that?
Well, I don't think it was connected to.
Yeah,
It was
we
given
spoke
to
about it.
them. It was given to them. It was not up or down instead of up.
That's it. It was given from above. It was not. It was not something we owned through our efforts. When you get a gift from above, you don't appreciate it. But when you work hard for something, you own it and it becomes yours. And that's why this exile is so long. Is that we've got to own it and make it ours and not be gifted from heaven. So in the Garden of Eden, we were gifted. We were gifted at Mount Sinai with the giving of the Torah. We were gifted with it. And hence, that's why 40 days later, there is a golden calf. We were gifted with it, being in the desert, the manna, the well. And no, we have to till the soil. We have to work the land. We have to be engaged in the material world and refine it and refine us through it. And finally, that we can come to a time that we will own it, and therefore we'll be able to perceive Hashem's presence in this world. May it be now. Any other questions, comments?
Could you tell me, this may be a little off here, but David himself was not such a tzaddik all the time. He had his, and yeah, he merited having the schus of being this Davidic dynasty towards Mashiach. So how do you explain that as opposed to like Moshe Rabbeinu?
Right, very good question. Excellent question. So David HaMelech became a tzaddik, just like every tzaddik becomes a tzaddik. You're not born a tzaddik. You're only born with a potential to be a tzaddik. So he had the potential, and it was only realized after much work. And he did it differently than others. He is the epitome of a Baal Tshuva, of what it means to do tshuva to become a tzaddik. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do tshuva to become a tzaddik. He was, his divine service is that of the way of the righteous. King David has a different way, the way of a Baal Tshuva. And I'm going out on a limb over here because I don't know if this is the fact. I think I saw this written somewhere, but I don't know 100%. I have to look it up. But thank you, Alice, for the question, because so what's the connection King David then as the first Mashiach is very simple. Who are we? Also Bali Tshuva, right? Also ones who do Tshuva. That is us that will bring Mashiach. Just as he was the first one, he embodied that kind of divine service as a Baal Tshuva. So likewise, we will become that. We become that in order to be the ones who finally bring the final redemption. So perhaps that's a connection. I think I saw that, but I'm not certain 100%. Okay. But you get the connection.
So Moshe was more of a chariot of Hashem, like Abraham. Is that
He
what
was
you're
more
saying?
the he was more the tzaddik's tzaddik, and he's more the Baal Tshuva tzaddik. You know, that he went through trials and tribulations. He went through things that, you know, brought him to the level of tzaddik. Yes. Very good.
Mhm.
Excellent. All right. Amazing. So what's the take home? Take home is
Do more here.
Mashiach came and came by David, so we are certain that it will come now through Melech HaMashiach, and just as King David is about bringing completion to Torah mitzvahs, that's he laid the groundwork for it. So ultimately, this is what it is, in order that we can have a life that we can be involved with divine wisdom, with divine goodness. That's the world that we want to live in. We don't want to live in a world that is just, you know, is at peace from a bad place, but we want to be in a good space. We want to be in a divine space. And that's what Mashiach will bring us to, that divine space. Through Torah mitzvahs gives us that capacity. All right, folks. Thank you. A good vach to everybody.
Thank you,
for joining.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
Shabbat
Yeah,
tov.
Well,
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Have a nice evening.